Welcome to our travel insurance session, everybody. This is one of the last sessions of Shine Connect. So we've had a really great, 6 days different. We've had about 31 sessions. I think you were session 32, Fiona.
Oh, wow.
So welcome. But we're really excited to have Fiona McRae with us. I'm just letting in a few more people. Goodness, they keep coming, Fiona. You're a popular lady. So yeah, we know from the work that we do at Shine that travel insurance is one of the most common questions that we have. And I should have introduced myself. My name's Kynman. I'm co-CEO of Shine Cancer Support. But we know that loads of people have questions about travel after cancer, travel insurance after cancer. And it's the kind of thing that comes up again and again. Shine does have a travel guide, which is available online on our website, if anybody is interested, which has details and which we co-produced with Fiona and with young adults that have cancer as well. But obviously, post-COVID, a lot of people have kind of new and different questions. And Fiona has been a friend of Shine for a very long time. She's going to tell you a little bit about her story. She has started her own travel insurance company, so she is a font of knowledge about travel insurance. I know I've learned a lot from her. So I'm just going to hand it over to Fiona. She's going to tell us a little bit about her story and then about her business and how travel insurance works, and give you guys some tips. And then we'll open it up for questions and answers. We are going to finish at 1 to 2 today because we've got another session starting at 2, and we don't want to have too much crossover. But if you do have questions, feel free to pop them in the chat as we go along, and I will make sure Fiona answers them. So Fiona, over to you.
Thank you, Kynman. Well, hi, I'm Fiona McRae. So a little bit about me. I was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2005 when my son was 5 months old. And then subsequently, I was diagnosed with secondary breast cancer in 2000. So I'm now incurable and on treatment for life, and I take immunotherapy. All's going really well, and my scans for the last 12 months have been stable. So keeping my fingers crossed. But when I was first diagnosed in 2005, I couldn't get travel insurance. No, I was deemed uninsurable because I hadn't actually had the cancer removed from my body when I was looking for cover. I was in between my chemotherapy and waiting for my surgery, and my oncologist suggested I have a break abroad, which proved impossible because I couldn't get travel insurance cover. I was working in the insurance industry, and I just thought, well, I need to do something about this because it's ridiculous. So I created a travel insurance brand called Insurance With. And over the years, so that was, we've just sort of built on that, and we cover all people with medical conditions, particularly cancer and complex medical conditions. And we're ever changing. We're always updating, looking at medical screening, making sure it makes sense to people, and also making sure that we're taking into account how cancer treatment has moved forward in all those years and continues to move forward to be less severe on the body, so there's less side effects and things like that. And again, that's really, since my secondary diagnosis, that's really been brought home to me about how you can actually live with a cancer diagnosis and be on treatment full time. So that's a little bit about me and sort of my background and why I'm a font of knowledge on insurance, on travel insurance. So I just thought I've got a couple of points that, I want to go over with you guys. And then, as Kynman said, we'll take some questions at the end. So the first thing that I would talk about is some points to be aware of when you're actually looking for travel insurance after you've had a cancer diagnosis. So one of the things I would really urge you to consider not to do is exclude cancer cover from your travel insurance policy. A lot of people, if they've got cover with their bank or existing cover, they'll contact their existing provider, and the provider will go, oh, we can cover everything, but we just exclude your cancer. And you're not just excluding cancer, you're excluding your cancer and the treatment of it. So should you catch an infection when you're abroad, have a DVT, because some drugs cause DVTs, all of that just wouldn't be covered. So that's something I would urge you not to do, or else you could find yourself not covered when you really need it. And again, if you do have a bank policy or an employer's travel insurance policy, my advice would be to contact them first and see if they will offer you cover. And if they won't, or if they say that they'll exclude it, then my suggestion would be don't take that option and look for cover that somebody that will give you cover. But I always would recommend that you phone your bank or phone the insurance provider and speak to them. And if they will give you cover, make sure you get that in writing from them. The other thing that you need to consider when you're looking for cover is activities that you're thinking of doing. If you're considering skiing or any water sports and things when you're going abroad, make sure that those are covered, because they're not always covered under particularly specialist policies as standard, and you might have to buy top-up cover. So that's always something that you should be considering as well. And finally, the last thing, I would always recommend that everybody in your family or your traveling party is on your policy. So for example, if you buy a policy that covers your cancer and the rest of your family are on a separate policy and they haven't declared your cancer, if you need to cancel the policy, for example, if you're ill before you go and you can't go, you'll get paid out for that cancellation, but the rest of your family wouldn't, because they wouldn't have declared your cancer. So another recommendation is make sure that everybody in your traveling party is all on the one policy and everybody's declared your cancer, particularly if the trip depends on you going on it. So, you know, if it's your family and they just wouldn't travel without you, make sure that you're all on the one policy. So on to looking for travel insurance cover after you've had the cancer diagnosis. Now it can be, you know, it can seem difficult to get travel insurance cover after you've had a diagnosis, mainly because the providers that you've always used in the past, they probably now wouldn't cover you because they're just looking for like standard risks. So they wouldn't be looking to offer specialist cover. And that can seem quite daunting to people, or quite depressing that they're no longer able to access who they always access. But don't worry, there is cover available. And I'm going to try and help you find that cover. So the first thing that I would recommend doing is check the Money Helper website. So this is Money Helper, is a website run by the government, and it's got a travel insurance directory on it, and it lists all the specialist providers to help people that struggle to get travel insurance because of a medical condition cover. However, there's a number of providers on there, and my suggestion would be make sure that you only need to get quotes from a couple, and how to break that down to decide on your list of who you're going to get quotes for. Oh, sorry, Kaiwen's just popped up the link for Money Helper. Thank you, Kaiwen. To make a list of who you're going to approach for a quote, just get quotes from people that are using different medical screening systems. And Money Helper has recognized this. So they identify all the different medical screening systems used by each of the providers on the travel insurance directory. So pick one that uses one from each medical screening system, really. And then you should probably only need to, you know, choose about 4 providers from that directory to get a quote from. So my suggestion would pick about 4 or 5 from there, making sure you're using different medical screening systems. And then I would check a comparison site, just one comparison site. Again, all the comparison sites use the same medical screening system, so the outcome's not going to be much different from Money Supermarket or, you know, Go Compare and things like that. So they're not going to be much different. The price you're going to get, that's sort of your ballpark price. And then that should give you a broader look at what's available in the market for you. Things to consider if you're struggling to get cover or you're trying to reduce the cost. So some things that can help is be flexible on your travel dates. So depending on when you want to travel, after you've had, say, an operation, after you've finished a treatment or changed treatments, if you want to travel, say, within 6 weeks of changing treatment, that's going to be more expensive than, say, if you wait 3 months. And so that can make a difference, is being flexible on your travel dates, depending on when you've had treatment and surgery and things like that, if you can be as flexible as possible. And also think about the area that you're traveling to. So areas like Mexico can be really expensive to cover, as can America. You know, Australia and New Zealand is cheaper than America, and Europe is obviously cheaper as well. So again, be flexible on your destinations to think about that. So think about where you're going as well. Sometimes, and I know from personal experience, it's not about where you're going on holiday, it's the actual holiday and getting away from everything at home that reminds me that I've got cancer. So sometimes it's just about the break. So I would urge you not to be too fixated on a destination and be quite flexible on that as well. And also consider a single trip policy. I know I found it really difficult when I wasn't able to get an annual multi-trip policy when I was first diagnosed, because that's what I was used to. I was used to having an annual multi-trip policy and I could go off on holiday whenever I wanted. And then all of a sudden I was only offered single trip cover. And it was, yeah, it was really, really annoying. But again, it's about getting that break and getting away that was important. Yeah, it was annoying. Cancer gives you enough shit to deal with. And this was just something else, but I could still get cover and I could still get away. So again, you know, maybe that's something that you could consider as well, is looking for a single trip policy. And some other things that, as I deal with people traveling a lot and traveling after a cancer diagnosis, there are some things that come along just about advice about traveling after a cancer diagnosis and what you need to consider. And one of the things that has come up this in the last couple of weeks, actually, from an article that we've written on Insurance With about traveling with medication. So, you know, I have like Oromorph for breakthrough bone pain and things like that. So if I need to check that I can take that into the country that I'm traveling to. And lots of people don't consider some of the drugs that they might be traveling with might be illegal in the country that they're traveling to. So you can still take those drugs into that country, but it's just a lot more complicated. You need to contact the country's embassy, check what you can take in. And if you have got an illegal prescription drug, you do need to fill in forms, and that can take 2 to 3 weeks. So just make sure that you're organized with that, particularly if you do need to travel with some quite heavy duty drugs. That would be my advice. The other thing to do is consider if you do need assistance at the airport. I've also come across a lot of people that have requested assistance at the last minute at the airport, and the airline is saying, yep, that's fine, we can give you assistance, but we now need a fit to fly letter from you. And people are trying to arrange this within 2 days of travel. So again, this is something that you need to consider, you know, well in advance, that if you do want assistance at the airport, request it early, but also get your fit to fly letter early from your doctor, GP or treating team. Again, those can sometimes take about a week, 10 days, 2 weeks to arrange. So just make sure that you're arranging those in plenty of time. And the other thing to consider is when you're booking a holiday is how able are you to sit for long periods of time? So particularly if you're on a busy flight, if you're not able to move around, again, you might not be that comfortable on a long flight. And that's something that people don't consider after a cancer diagnosis. They're used to jumping on planes and flying long distances, but after their cancer diagnosis, that's something they don't always consider. So that's something, again, when you're looking at where you're going to, consider how long you'd be able to sit for, because if the plane's particularly busy, you might not be able to move around the way you would want to. So that's something that you should consider as well. And also, when you are traveling, going back to the drugs, is make sure you carry a copy of your prescription with you, just in case you're held up abroad or you lose your medication. You need to know what you've got, so you're easily able to get some more or duplicates if that's what you need. And normally I always take a copy of my diagnosis, so it's just the last clinic letter that I had, so you know, it breaks down exactly what your diagnosis was. I've always found that's handy, you know, particularly if I'm going to a pharmacy, and if I need any drugs and things like that, I can explain, and it's all there, what my exact diagnosis is. And finally, check with your team before you travel if they're happy with your travel plans, and do you need to take any extra antibiotics with you. I always travel with a couple of broad range spectrum antibiotics. Just because of my treatment, I'm very prone to picking up infections. So I always travel with those. In fact, I've got them at home. So my job is when I'm traveling, when we're going off on holiday, I just make sure the antibiotics that I've got at home are still in date. And if not, I just get a repeat prescription. But that's something, so that's something that you need to be considering as well. And again, in plenty of time to make sure that you've got that for your travel. So I've rattled through this quite quickly, I know, but normally from experience, we do have quite a lot of questions, and I know we are quite time tight on this one today. So I have rattled through quite quickly, but anything that I've said, just happy to take questions on and clarify more for you.
No, that's great. Thank you, Fiona. And I think, yeah, it's interesting, right? Because there is a lot to think of. There's more to think about, especially if you're on some kind of treatment, to make sure you're carrying medication, and that, if something does go wrong, that you can get it. I know I was in the US a few years ago, and I get quite bad headaches, and I went to a pharmacy and asked if they had kind of cocodamol, and they don't give codeine over the counter in the US. So they looked at me like I was, a drug addict, basically.
Yeah.
And yeah, I should have taken some with me. So one question someone's popped in the chat was just about, can you explain what medical screening is? So a lot of people probably don't know how that works.
Yeah. So any travel insurance provider that does specialist travel insurance, they use a medical screening system to assess the risk of the person with the medical condition. And there's a number of different medical screening systems that are used in the market. And depending on the medical screening system will depend on the outcome that you get. So if everybody's using the same medical screening system, more or less you're going to get the same outcome. The prices may vary a little bit, but more or less you're going to get the same outcome. So that's why I encourage people to use different medical screening systems, because it's going to give you a different outcome. So
and these are basically the computer programs that you go through, and you add in all your details, and it kind of spits out an answer at the end.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, because I know you did some work through your own company a few years ago, looking at how could you, get sort of reasonable outcomes, so that the computer just didn't go, wow, they have cancer, but it was actually saying, right, okay, looking at periods of stability, what treatments are you on, that kind of thing.
And that's what we do, and that's something we carry on doing. I have a panel of about 35 people with cancer and secondary cancer, and we're continually reviewing questions and having their input into how we ask a question to make sure they're not triggering for people, and also to make sure the questions we're asking make sense, and it actually fits with current treatment regimes as well. The best people that we find to talk to help us update our system is our customers that actually use it, because they're fonts of knowledge. So we do that. The one we use is very, very comprehensive. There are others that ask fewer questions. That doesn't mean that our system is going to be better for you or theirs is going to be better. And that's why I'm encouraging you or everybody to get quotes from everywhere, because that's the only way they're going to know. I can't say hand on heart, oh, we're going to be the best here, because I don't know. Because everybody's different, and that's why you should get, quotes from different systems.
So someone said, and I think actually this might be something that's covered by the Money Helper website you mentioned, but somebody's asked, do you have a list of providers which cover cancer as a medical condition? The reason I'm asking is that I tried the comparison sites, and although they, some of them said they covered cancer, some of them didn't cover cancer.
Yeah, so on Money Helper, I believe there's some questions that you can answer at the beginning, and then they will then just show you the providers on Money Helper that will cover. I don't know, I can't remember offhand if it does cancer specific. I know it does ask if you've got a terminal condition, and then they will only give you providers that will cover people with terminal conditions and things like that. But have a look. But the providers on Money Helper are the specialists, and I would, as I say, make a list of who to try on there, and then just make sure that they're all using the different screening systems, each one that you use.
Yeah, and you can get, I mean, I know from my own situation, so I had stage 4 cancer 12 years ago, and I have an immune deficiency, and I know I was looking for insurance in the summer, and the quotes, I mean, they just were hugely different. I think I got one in the end for 149 pounds, but a lot of them were 700-800 pounds. So it just, you
need to look around, and just see. And as I say, Money Helper is a good start, but I would also encourage you to just try a comparison site as well, because they've got lots of providers on there. And depending on how and where you are in if you've got primary cancer or secondary cancer, a comparison site might be, good for you.
Yeah, great. So someone else has said, I have an EU European health card. Would that cover you for cancer in Europe?
No, so you will get, that was one of the things I should have mentioned on my top tips. So the EHIC, or the replacement GHIC, since we left, since Brexit, it isn't a substitute for travel insurance. So you will get the same treatment as a resident of that country, and not all of it is free at the point of use. So you might have to pay something towards it. But one thing it absolutely won't cover is if you do need to come home, and you do need to be repatriated home. That's not covered. So a lot of people say, well, I'll just buy a cheap flight and jump on a flight, but you just might not be fit enough to do that. And if I don't know, say if you break a bone abroad and then you come limping up to the airplane, the airline are going to want a fit to fly letter from a doctor. They might need you to have a medical escort because you've had a broken bone or there's something wrong with you. They might stipulate that. So it's not as easy as some people might think of just coming home on a flight. And all of that can cost money, and all of that would be covered by travel insurance. So you've got a very minimal medical cover there, but if something goes wrong, you're not going to be covered to get home and things like that.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Right. Loads of questions coming in. So someone's asked, is there a difference between being on active treatment and being on something like Herceptin or tamoxifen from an insurance point of view? I'm hoping to book a holiday for later in the year, but I'm still on active treatment right now.
Yeah. So active treatment, it's far harder to get cover. Sometimes it depends on the type of active treatment. Normally for primary cancer, the active treatment is quite full on, and normally that's quite difficult to get cover for, because that really does deplete your white blood cells and things like that. So you are far more prone to infection. But then there's people that are living with cancer, are on lifetime treatment, that are still on active treatment, but it's not as full on as they would give you for primary cancer. So that is a possibility to get cover on, because it's not as toxic basically, and it doesn't sort of deplete your body so much. So there is more possibility to get cover on that. But once you're on Herceptin and tamoxifen, you should have no problem getting cover. Make sure you declare it, and the further you move away from the original diagnosis and stopping the active treatment, then the cheaper it's going to start to get for you. So initially you might see it's quite expensive compared to what you used to pay, but the further you move away from that, and if all you're ever doing is just taking tamoxifen and Herceptin, then you should start to see the price come down.
Great. So this is a great question, actually. So if you took out a multi-trip policy pre-diagnosis and you're still within that cover, do you need to tell your insurer about the diagnosis?
Yes. So one of the stipulations on a multi-trip policy is any change in medical history. You need to update. It's not covered. You're only covered at that point. So it's a bit like if you take out an annual car insurance for a Mini, and then decide to swap it for a Ferrari, and it's still being covered under the policy. You still need to update that. Or in a house insurance, you buy a really expensive item, you still need to, because the risk has changed. So you need to let them know. And depending on who your travel insurance provider is, they might no longer offer you cover, but they should offer you a pro rata refund on your annual multi-trip policy. And if you already have a holiday booked pre-diagnosis that you can no longer go on because of your diagnosis, you should be able to cancel that and get your money back on that.
Great. Okay. Someone else has said, is cancer at any stage considered terminal for insurance? I'm at stage 1, but I mean, it's not the insurance company that decides whether you're terminal or not.
No. So I think a lot of there is a question on a lot of providers is, have you been diagnosed with terminal cancer? So because I've got secondary cancer, they would say, well, that's terminal because it's incurable. So I would have to say yes, but that by saying yes doesn't mean you're not going to get cover, because there's many people living with incurable cancer and living long and, going on holiday and things like that, and relatively normal lives. So so it's you would normally they would say your cancer's terminal if it's incurable, but it's quite a moot point now, because my oncologist doesn't use that. He just sort of says that, oh, you're incurable, but you could die of something else, we're hoping. not anytime soon.
Not anytime soon.
I mean?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think like I said, I had stage 4 non-Hodgkin lymphoma, but there's no evidence that that's around anymore. And that's one of the things I know we spoke about a long time ago, is, that the insurance companies weren't really understanding that. So the understanding of that has evolved, hasn't it?
Yes, yeah. With some providers, some are still not considering that. They still look at cancer the way people used to look at cancer, which is not talked about in the C word and whispered in corners. But yeah, hopefully there's more and more people understanding that you can live with an incurable cancer.
Definitely. So someone else has said, I've been NED, so no evidence of disease, for over a year with no treatment plans or medication for the future. However, I'm still having lots of problems getting insurance. And when I do, it's super expensive and hard to get to the countries I want. Oh, I feel for you. I've been there. What would you recommend in terms of getting insurance that's cancer related, that could be cheaper or easier? It's really hard.
Yeah, that is quite difficult, and without knowing the specifics of that, I mean, if I'm happy for you to pass my contact details on, Kaiwen, and I can have a closer look at that, because I don't quite understand why, from what you said there, why that would be the case, and I'm happy to have a closer look at that for you.
Okay.
Sorry, that's not very helpful to everybody else, but I can't understand why you're struggling. So
I'll pop my email in the chat at the end, and anyone who wants to get in touch can do that.
Okay.
Someone else has said, I've tried to get a quote for travel insurance, but it always says no cover is available. And it's the same elsewhere. So that's on a few different insurance sites. Is there any way I can get past this?
So although it says no covers available, there probably is a number for you to call. And I would encourage you to call. So a lot of providers, and I know it's something that we offer as well, is that what it means is that you just can't get a quote online, and they need to pull it offline and understand a little bit more about your condition. So, for example, one of the things that and this is something that we recently updated from talking to my panel of people that help us. We used to, if somebody had low neutrophils, we would then say, well, actually, we want to understand more about low neutrophils, and we would pull that offline. So it wouldn't be available online, it would be taken offline to speak to a medical underwriter. And 9 times out of 10, we would be able to cover that person by just understanding why their neutrophils are low, and a lot of the time it's because of treatment, but they bounce back quite quickly and things like that. They take antibiotics away with them, or they're mitigating their risk all the time once we speak to them, and that's really what the underwriter wants to understand. So if you're just looking at that online and seeing no cover provided online, I would encourage you to phone the number that's there and speak to somebody. They'll ask you some more questions, and hopefully they'll be able to provide a quote at the end of that. But again, I know you want to try, you're saying you want to go to the countries, but maybe try to be flexible and understand why, and maybe ask the question, is there a possibility at a later stage I can go to this country, or things like that. So talk to the person that, on the other end of the phone, and they should be able to advise if that's possible, and when maybe to try for a quote.
And I would say, just when you're doing that, get yourself a strong cup of coffee, set aside some time, because I've done it, and it can be tough, because as well, you're going to be asked personal questions, which can also, might not feel great. So it's important just to kind of set aside some time. Don't do it like I always do it, half an hour before you're about to leave for the airport. Or the night before, when you go, 6 p.m. I should really get some travel insurance. Do it beforehand. One question that's kind of linked though, Fiona, because I've learned a lot from you over the years, and one thing I've always found really interesting is, we talk about, say, the US being really expensive, or Mexico, and part of that is about the medical systems that different countries have, so where you have to pay for medical care, but also it's about the distance you have to travel, isn't it? Because I know you've talked about, Europe, you can maybe be put in an ambulance and be brought home, whereas if you're somewhere you have to fly, that can affect it. So could you just say a little bit more about that, because that might help people as well understand where they can go?
So when a travel insurer is looking to see, what sort of risk you would pose, and one of the things they've got to consider is, if something should go wrong, how are they going to get you back home? So the further away you are, say in a country with really expensive medical systems, that's going to be expensive, and they've got to consider, well, what if they can't actually put you in a plane or an air ambulance to get you home? They're going to have to, one, you're going to be stuck in a foreign country on your, with just your family members there, and that again comes with its own issues. But you're also, it's the expense that's racked up, and also that they're just not able, they're not able to get you well enough to get you even in an air ambulance to get you home. And so that's something that's always worth considering. So that's sometimes why, particularly people that have complex conditions and are maybe quite ill, that's sometimes why you might only be offered cover, say, in mainland Europe, because the insurer knows that if anything happens, they don't have to depend on an airplane getting you home. They can put you in a road ambulance and they can get you home by road, and it's just far more easier for them. So again, when you're considering where you want to travel to, these are things you need to think about. It's really boring. And Kaiwan and I had a chat at the beginning about how boring trying to keep on top of all this cancer admin is. And again, that's something really boring, I know, but it's something that when you're traveling that you do need to consider.
Yeah. And as a Canadian, I'm always outraged that Canada and the US get lumped in together as in insurance, but it's, we're next to each other when we're far away. So someone else has said, if you're still, the good question here, Rachel, if you're still on active treatment now, but you want to book a holiday for months after treatment finishes, what's the best way to approach the insurers? Because if you're thinking 5 months down the line, I'm going to be finished treatment, I want to go away, but you're on active treatment now, is it a bit of a gray area? How does that work?
You're going to struggle to get cover, because the reason why you will struggle to get cover is because they don't know how you're going to be at the end of that treatment. That's unknown. Are you going to be well enough to actually go on that holiday in 5 months' time? So could they be leaving themselves? So because that's sort of, we just don't know how you're going to be at the end of that. And you're booking a holiday and insuring it so that they're liable for that cancellation. What I would suggest there is, when you want, if that's what you want to do and you want to have something to look forward to, is look around and see what holidays you could go on, and maybe do some quotes online as if you're through the treatment and everything like that, and everything's gone well, to give you an idea of what the cost is going to be. But bear in mind, you would need to double check that once you've actually through treatment. And if you did want to book a holiday, I would suggest booking one with a really low deposit, or 100% get your cancellation back, because that's going to be your risk, is that you're not able to go on that holiday and you would need to cancel it. So that's going to be your big risk. And then I would, before you finalize the holiday and pay the rest of the money and things like that, or get into when you wouldn't get the 100% deposit back, I would then check the travel insurance. But by that time, you'd be finished your active treatment. You would need to leave it about 6 to 8 weeks after your active treatment's finished, to look for cover.
Great, thanks, Fiona. Well, actually, that relates to the next question, which is, so someone finished chemo earlier this month, so early November. They were planning a trip for January. Doctors have said their immunity should return within a few weeks after finishing treatment, but the insurance companies ask, have you had cancer within the last 5 years? I'm not going to be at risk of infection for 5 years, so why do I have to declare it for so long? And do I need to tell my existing insurers that I've had cancer? So yes, you should tell your existing insurers, but why do we have to declare it for so long?
Yeah, so although it's not risk of infection, chemotherapy has or active treatment does have a lot of different effects on the body that can be ongoing. So your risk of infection might have lessened, but there could be a myriad of other things going on, and your risk is higher than somebody that's never had cancer. So that's why you've got to declare that, because the risk is different now from when you didn't have cancer. But if you're on no other treatment at all, not even a maintenance treatment or a hormone treatment, then you should start to see, the further you move away from that treatment finishing, you should start to see your prices dropping quite quickly. But you will have to declare it, and sometimes be careful. Lots of there are travel insurance providers that will ask, have you ever had cancer? And you do, and if you've had cancer, although many years ago, you still need to declare it. It's not going to have a bearing on the premium at all, but it's something that if they ask that question and you don't declare it, then they could at a claim stage, if then something happens in relation to your cancer, which is bizarre. It might not, but it could happen. And then they say, well, you never told us you had cancer. And it wouldn't have had a bearing on the premium, but it's just they can see the actual full range of the risk they're taking on. And I think people think when they're declaring their cancer or they're declaring a medical condition, it's going to really, really affect the premium. Sometimes it doesn't. Cancer obviously does initially, but as you move through it doesn't really.
Yeah, thanks. Actually, just sort of a related point, someone else had a question earlier about how do you know if an insurance company is legitimate? So someone said they bought insurance through a company, which I think they are legit. But how do you know? Is there a list of providers who are legitimate?
They'll all be anybody selling insurance in the UK has to be authorised and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority, and that they'll have their FCA number at the bottom of the website. All the providers on the government's travel insurance directory, they're all regulated, and they wouldn't be on there because they've got to put their regulation number and everything on when they're applying to go on there. So all of those are, but anybody selling in the UK, they've got to give their financial services number at the bottom of the website. So that should be there, and you can take that number and then you can check on the FCA website and just make sure it all ties up. Right. If you're at all concerned.
I'm just going to put that travel insurance directory in the chat again, because I think some people joined late. So if you didn't see it, it's still there. One more question. Is traveling to the USA a no, or is it just very expensive to get covered? Planning a family trip to Vegas, but both myself and my sister have been treated for cancer this year.
Okay, it shouldn't be a no, but it will be more expensive than Europe, obviously. And sometimes it can be a no, depending on, how complex your condition is, or, how your chemotherapy how well you are really. That can affect it. So, you know, all being well, you've had, both you and your sister have had your treatment, you're doing well, you're stable on whatever you're doing at the moment. Either the treatment that you're on is also, you're when I say stable, I don't mean your cancer stable, but everything's sort of stable on that treatment. You're used to the treatment that you're taking, if you're taking treatment. Because sorry, that was a bit confusing. So we say we look for stability, but it's not necessarily. Some people can still have progression in their cancer, but they're stable on the drugs that they're having, and we know that nothing's going to happen to do with the cancer in that period, or if it does, it's unlucky, and that's what insurance is for. So that's the two stables that we're talking about. That might have confused people a wee bit, sorry.
No, I think it makes sense. Yeah, you look for stability. You want to make sure that people are well on the drugs that they're taking, even if things are progressing slowly, but that they can, the medicine they're taking isn't suddenly going to make them ill when they're away.
No, and if it does, that they're already managing the side effects of that, and they're taking the drugs for that as well, because that's the biggest problem. One of the things that we would say is, if you've just changed treatments, we would look for 6 weeks on that new treatment to make sure all side effects are managed. So we don't want you going away and then all of a sudden you've got, something happens and it's a side effect of these drugs, and then that's got to be managed in a foreign country. So that's why we say 6 weeks on new treatment.
One thing we haven't covered actually, Fiona, is COVID. It would be good just to maybe understand a little bit about, is there anything that we need to be considering in terms of COVID cover, or is that all standard now in travel insurance?
No, so what is standard in most travel insurance policies now is, if you catch COVID abroad, you will get treatment if you need treatment. But what is not covered under a lot of policies, and you sometimes need to buy the top-up COVID cover, is if you catch COVID before you're traveling, and then you want to cancel your holiday because you can't travel, or if you've got to isolate before you travel because a family member's caught it or something, and you can cancel. So normally you can buy top-up covers for that. And then if you catch COVID when you're abroad, and you can't travel home as planned because you've got COVID, the top-up cover would cover you to stay longer in the country that you're in and pay for new flights, a contribution towards flights to get you home and things like that. So that's the top-up cover. I would always recommend taking top-up COVID cover, because we never know when, COVID can flare at any minute, as we know, and particularly traveling on airplanes. If you're stuck in a country that you can't come home from, it can be quite expensive trying to rearrange your travel, stay somewhere until you become negative and things like that. So I would always recommend checking the COVID cover on the policy you're buying, and check to see if you need what COVID upgrades they offer, and see what the cover is.
Okay, great. One more question about, is it worth going to an insurance broker? Or is it better just to go to a company directly?
You could go to an insurance broker, but it depends if they've got links to specialist insurers. It depends on what broker that you're going to go to. Because they might only have one specialist provider that they'd use. So although they're a broker, you're only going to get the quote from that one provider they've got that relationship with. You're not going to get the broad spectrum, and that's what we need to have a look at, because there's nobody in the market can say we're best for everybody with cancer, because that's just not true. And depending on where you are in your treatment, and how severe your treatment is, there's going to be a different provider that's best for you. And that's one of the reasons why they started Money Helper, to try and help that and put all the providers in one place, so people could have a choice and go through them. So I would recommend, I know I keep recommending Money Helper, but it is a really good place to start.
Yeah, and I think it's about, sort of, like I said, taking the time, isn't it, to shop around, and just that boring cancer admin, set some time aside to look. And
it can be triggering, and there's no doubt about it. It can be really triggering. And you need to be in the right headspace to do it, and have a lot of time to do it as well, because some of the screenings, depending on how complex your condition is, or if you've got additional conditions on top of already having cancer, that can be quite complex, and it can take time to get all that information, and it can be quite triggering as well. So yeah, just a word of warning. And it's not an ideal situation, but unfortunately that is the only way to do it.
And just in terms of prices, I mean, I thought when I was booking to go away in the summer that prices seemed quite high. Have they increased since COVID happened, or are there other reasons why it's increased?
Yeah, no, I mean, travel insurance in general, not just on specialist providers, has increased because costs around the world have increased. So medical treatment around the world has increased. So that affects everybody, not just people with medical conditions, because anybody going abroad could, be taken ill or break a bone or something like that. So that's all gone up. And it's just, we've got massive inflation in this country, but so as, the US and the majority of countries around the world, we're all seeing an increase in everything. And that is reflected in travel insurance. So it's not just us because we've got cancer, it's everybody, unfortunately. But because we pay more, we see it more.
Great. Well, I think we've managed to actually get through most of the questions, Fiona, which is amazing. I'm just going to drop my email address in the chat in case anyone did want to get in touch with Fiona directly for a specific question that she might be able to help with. Like I said, we do on the Shine website have a section on travel insurance with a guide that we wrote with Fiona. Mm-hmm. So please do check that out. That's at shinecancersupport.org. And yeah, just a big thank you, Fiona, for helping.
You're welcome.
Always great to have a chat and yeah, just to sort of understand more about this, because I think it's a really tricky thing, and it's just confusing, and it's one more thing on top of everything.
Yeah, and I get it, and it is just one more thing, and it is confusing. It's really confusing. I mean, I've worked in insurance all my life, and it confuses me sometimes. So I don't know how anybody else gets on that doesn't have the knowledge that I've got. So I can really appreciate how confusing it can be. And because cancer is so individual, it's about helping. It's how as an industry we can start to give that more individual help, and that's really what we're trying to push for, to have more of that, a more individual approach. Because cancer is a very individual thing, really. We all react differently to it.
Absolutely. Just before we log off, I'm going to launch a poll. We would love to know what you thought of the session. And just a reminder as well, we've recorded this session, but other sessions are available via the CrowdComms platform that you registered for Shine Connect on. So please, if you missed anything, you can log on and watch those back. And we've got a final session for Shine Connect to kind of round up at 2 p.m. If you're free, please join us. We will be on Zoom again. But lots of love for you coming through, Fiona, people saying thank you so much.
Thank you. It was lovely to talk to you all. Thank you.
And actually, somebody earlier said that you were very inspirational. So thank you.
Oh, thank you very much.
I'm going to stop recording now. But